Ooh. Oh Jesus, I'm a cracker. Hello and welcome to this week's reading vlog. I read a total of this many books this week. So this week I decided that I would read from my 23 most anticipated reads list. I read around 9, but a few more have been released, so I thought, why not read them? So let's take a look at what I'm going to read. It is absolutely pouring today. My garage is already flooding. It's just massive thunderstorms and lightning, and it was just a torrential downpour. So I'm going to be obviously on alert for indoor flooding. It's just one of those days, man. So I am home. I am wet, but no worse for wear. I was meant to go and run errands this morning, but I ain't walking around with an umbrella. So I'm going to be at home. I think it's best to be home anyway so that I can monitor the flooding and make sure it doesn't get worse. I'm going to just have to wait out the rain and then go and do my errands later. I was also meant to film the Kiddos Corner segment, but I am not going to do it. I just can't be bothered doing them anymore. It's too much extra work. So from now on, if I read a middle grade, I'm just going to talk about it in the regular vlog. The first book that I'm going to read for this week's reading vlog is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I think that's what it's called. I'm not sure, but there'll be a picture here. So I will touch base with you when I have read some of it.
As well. This book bounces through characters in one family between Pakistan in the past and California now. It's one of my favorite young adult books that I've ever read.
Okay, so I was reading The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, and normally I like to read at least 50 pages before DNFing, but I could not do it. Could not. I think I finally gave up at 43. I just loathe this book so much. So much. I'll start with the premise. It's supposed to be this gothic romantic tale about this husband and wife who have secrets. Let's start off with the husband and wife. Insta love, as in they get married straight away. Their relationship, so toxic, so incredibly toxic. The wife is like, you better not look into my past, naughty, naughty, no, no. And then the husband's like, but I am a human and curiosity is my thing. I could not stand their relationship. They were constantly playing games with each other and it was gross. It was really gross. I had this ick feeling reading about their dynamic and how they were behaving towards each other. I really didn't like it. The husband's voice felt really female. I actually thought that character was female until found out they weren't. So they sounded very similar to the wife. The writing itself, my God, there's like purple prose and then there's like purple prose. This was so flowery, I was drowning in it. It was just over the bloody top. Too much, man. Look, I love me some purple prose sometimes, but this was just ridiculous. It was like, how can I be extra? How extra can I go with this sentence? And then adding even another extra layer on top of that. It was just ridiculous. And I really did not enjoy it. So you're pairing the awful purple prose with the absolutely toxic shitstorm of a relationship between the husband and wife. And then they're trying to do the whole mystery. There were two mysteries pretty much. So the husband had what he thought was a brother. So you get told that he grew up with a brother and then one day the brother was gone and everybody was denying the brother's existence. So he's like, was my brother real or were they not? Kind of intrigued about that, but not enough to read this book. And then the wife's mystery is she had a childhood friend. So her name is Indigo and she had a childhood friend named Azure. And what happened there? They were thick as thieves and then all of a sudden no longer. But like I said, I could not give a shit. Could not give any. It was just, I just hated it. I hated it so much. I didn't want to read it. Like, yeah, just the combination of the extravagant writing, which was also nonsensical, and the redonkulous relationship between the husband and wife. Nah. So no, thank you. I'm DNFing that so hard. The next book I'm going to read is called Ven Co. It's about witches. Ven Co is just a jumble of the word coven. And I don't really know much about it. I am going to read the blurb this time, to be honest. I think I'm going to start reading blurbs going in so I'm not left floundering confused as to what the heck's going on. But I've heard good things about this one so far, so fingers crossed it'll be a winner. But yes, it was not off to a great start. My God. If I had this book, I would burn it. I can't believe how worked up I've gotten, but I just hated it so page. But hey, it made me feel things. I'm feeling things on this dreary day. So points for that, I guess. Just got this package. Let's open it up and see what's inside. And here we go, one of my favorite books. And check it out. Sprayed edges. So I wanted to get one of these fancy books, but it had to be a book that I loved, and The Little Prince is one of those books, and I love stars, so this is just wonderful, and it's a beautiful edition of the book as well. So I'm super, super, super happy. So I'm just casually sitting in this corner. Hey Sylvie, watch me insert myself into my cat's personal space. She's like, why are you doing this? I'm sorry, baby. I did read this book, The Hedge Witch by Cari Thomas, because I read it for my Wild Ones book club. I will talk about it there. So if you want to find out what I thought about this little sweet pea, tune in to the Wild Ones book club for this. I have started reading Ven Co, and I'm really glad that I read the blurb for this one because I would have been lost. So we're starting out with a scene where there's a maiden and mother and a crow, and they seem to be in a very contemporary world. They run a business. You're getting the hint that maybe there is magic in play because they're talking about finding the sixth witch. And so after that, we cut the scene to Lucky. She's so lucky. So Lucky is not that lucky. Her name ain't working for her. Her mother died when she was young, and she's finding herself taking care of her aging grandmother in a little apartment, and she's about to be evicted. So things are not looking good for Lucky. But then one day she's faffing about in her basement and she finds a key, and that key unlocks a door. In that door she finds a spoon, and with that spoon it seems things are kicked into place. 1 second, darling. I will touch base with you tomorrow once I've read a bit more Ven Co.
Eugene Krabs, I forgot to unfreeze you. What the? Oops. I guess I had it set to real boy ending. Yippee! Oh, I'm sorry for falsely freezing you, Krabs.
Hello. So there's a little kitty over here baking biscuits behind me. So I have finished Ven Co. I really wanted to love this. Let me just start with the pros and cons and what the book is about. So basically you have a woman named Lucky St. James who's quite down on her luck, and she ends up becoming involved with a coven of witches. So in this world you have different witches. So some are good at finding things, relaying information. There's different types. And then there's this coven. And this coven has to be made of 7 witches, and we're going through the journey of locating all of these 7 witches. This coven runs a business called Ven Co, which is supposed to put women into positions of power, and they are extraordinarily wealthy. But you never find out really what the company actually does, and that really did irk me. I'm like, but what do you actually do? What do you do here? Some of the pros, excuse the church bells. The women who are in the coven are fantastic. They're a group of feisty, colourful women that include queer, trans, indigenous, and elderly women. So I think that that's amazing to have some diversity in their coven. And there's sort of a found family aspect along with that as well. Then there is a magic system that's possibly interesting, and a plot that is possibly interesting. Unfortunately, both of these things are just not explained or explored. So we'll go on to some of the negatives now. In this world, you've got this coven of witches, and the way that they find each other is they end up coming across a spoon that has the word Salem on it. And one part of the book is each of the women explaining how they found their spoons, and it really wasn't that interesting. It's like, hey, I was doing this, and then a spoon appeared, and we had to go through that 7 times. So that was a bit dull. And then you've got witch hunters. So these men who are part of the Benandati, and their role is to kill these women and stop the coven of 7 from forming again. There is only one member left, and his name is J. Christos. And I'm like, are you telling me Jesus Christ, J. Christos? Like, come on, man. And this dude was written in a way to pretty much try and epitomize the shittiness, sexist grossness of men. He was just a caricature of all the things that is horrible about men. And it's just too over the top. It was too over the top. We also don't really understand how his powers work and why he is still doing what he's doing. It just didn't make sense. So much about this book was not explained and didn't make sense. So the purpose of these women coming together is supposedly to restore magic to women everywhere, but we're not really shown what that means. So this book left me feeling very confused, and I didn't understand what anything meant. And there was like sort of romance chemistry thing happening, which was just disgusting. It was really gross. And also that didn't make sense. I'm like, but why do we have to go here? It's just no thank you. There's a twist at the end, but it's a bit of a meh twist. It's like, okay, full story, bro. But what's the point? What's the point of that twist? But yeah, there was just so much left to be desired. It had potential. I liked Lucky St. James, but also too, she did some really dumb shit. These oracles, so these are the main women that run the company, and it's the maiden, the mother, and the crone. They don't really do anything except for like calling people and be like, hey, you got to find this witch. So their purpose also was a bit like, what do you do? What do you do? And it was so slow, and it got real boring just constantly traveling and trying to find the seventh witch. And there was a twist with who the witch was. And I'm like, oh, I don't think that's a great twist. That seventh member, it's going to cause some issues. You kind of need everybody functioning at their best, and this was not the case. It also included Lucky's grandmother, who was suffering from dementia, and at times it felt like she was sort of put in there for comic relief. I'm not sure how I felt about that. Yeah, so we're told that we've got to find this seventh witch, and there's this witch hunter out there who's killing witches. But then like he's just like, you know what? I'm going to go face him on my own. It's like, why would you do that when you know that you're stronger together? It doesn't make sense, lady. But they're like, yeah, sure, cool, go ahead. Hope you win. So yeah, it just didn't pan out. There was just too much stuff not explained. And you need explanations. I need to understand how the magic works. I need to understand why the seven is special. I need to understand what happens after this event. And none of that was really explained. Like I said, the guy was just so cringy. It was so cringy reading that I'm like, this is not a real person. Real people aren't like this. This is just a caricature of men. But that was Ven Co, so I did decide to give it 3 stars. It was middle of the road. The next book I read was The Rom-Com Agenda by Jane Denker. So this book is about a man named Eli who has just been dumped by his girlfriend and who cannot get over her, and he wants to marry her even though they're only dating for 4 months. And it was witnessed by, I think her name is Lee, yeah, Lee, who was painting a boathouse at the time and was like, oh God, I just witnessed someone's embarrassing moment. But that guy's kind of cute. And then what happens is Eli's family and friends, who really don't understand boundaries and are over the top, just with so loud and quirky, and oh my God, Eli, we're giving you a makeover. They were just maniacal in their quest to give Eli a makeover, and I had some issues with that. They were really pointing out all this dude's flaws, basically telling him, you're a piece of shit, and if we don't fix you, then Victoria ain't ever gonna watch you back. Eli goes along with it, even though he doesn't want to. And I just felt very uncomfortable reading all those scenes where they are embarrassing him in public by pretty much saying, look at this turd, we need to polish it. So anyway, along they go, they enter a store that Leah works in, selling clothes, and they make him try on all these clothes, and her and Eli have a bit of a moment. And then she's like, you know what would make this even better if you tailored these clothes? Why don't you head next door and get them tailored? And he's like, sure. They go next door, and then out pops Leah, because she works there as well. And she's like, I'm going to tailor them for you. So she tailors his clothes, and then they're like, we need to cut his mountain man hair. Basically, they call him Forrest Gump after he's run the marathon. So she's like, hey, why don't you go to this hairstylist? And they go to that hairstylist, and Leah works there as well. And at that point, I'm like, bruh, look, yeah, some of us have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Okay, it's a bit much. And also she's just like promoting all the jobs she works at. It was a bit ridiculous at that point, but this book is a bit ridiculous. So anyway, go and get his hair cut. And then the women, the sisters of friends, are like, hey Leah, why don't you just join us on this quest to make Eli fuckable? Okay, so she's like, why not? And they just keep Leah's backstory is that she's a foster kid. And the reason that she became a foster kid is because her mother has bipolar and was therefore an unfit mother. And I kind of found a bit of an issue with that. I don't really like instances where they paint issues like bipolar in such a negative light. Like, if you have bipolar, you're a shit mother. Could have done anything else. Not a fan of that. So anyway, she was surrendered by her mother and ended up with this foster woman who from the book we're told like she's a bit of a cold bitch. I'm sorry, but that's how it came across. She wasn't very nice to Leah, and Leah was there for 3 years. But then as an adult, the foster mother got sick and Leah became the caretaker, even though the foster mother actually has a biological son. Yeah, so Leah somehow ended up being the caretaker of her foster mother, and cared for her until her death. And everyone's like, oh, it's such a sad story, how tragic. And you're just constantly talking about it while she can overhear them. And I'm like, ugh. So I got to 55 pages of this and I couldn't do it anymore. So this guy, Eli, was dating this woman for 4 months. This woman, it was going to overseas for 10 months. And he decided to propose to her. And she's like, oh there, boy. No. We only known each other for 4 months. It's been nice, but I'm not really into marrying you. And I think it's best we part ways. And he just couldn't accept that. So he's been pining and allowing himself to fester and mope. And then now all they're doing is trying to make him hot enough to win her back when she returns. So he's just constantly going on and on about this woman that he only knew for 4 months, while Leah is obviously sitting there pining for him. So I could just tell, like, oh, I just don't like anybody. I don't really like anybody in this book. And it is so over the top ridiculous. The whole premise was like, oh, we're going to talk about all these rom-com movies and do these makeovers, but it just felt gross. If you want a book that has some great nostalgia for movies, romantic movies from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, read better than the movies. That was way better done than this. So after I got 55 pages in, I read other people's reviews and I'm like, okay, I'm justified in DNFing it. They all said pretty much the same thing. The romance just wasn't it. And the way that they were just completely emasculating Eli, and Eli was so bizarre. He didn't feel like a real person. The way he spoke and acted was real weird. I can't articulate exactly what I mean. I was like, Eli, like, stand your ground and tell these meddlesome friends and family to leave you alone and let you grieve how you want to grieve and let you do what you want to do without totally making you feel like you're a hot piece of garbage. So that was the rom-com agenda. Okay, so the next book I read was The Librarian of Crooked Lane. And oh, I really should have DNF'd this one, but I just kept going because I thought maybe it will get interesting. No. So I gave this 2.5 stars. You have a librarian named Sylvia. I think this is like historical, and it was set after the war and the Spanish flu that devastated everybody, where women were required to fill the positions of men who had gone to war, so they were finally able to work. And Sylvia was a journalist, and this is rammed down your throat. She was a journalist. She was a journalist. What does that even mean in the context of the story? Absolutely nothing. So Sylvia, who was a journalist, once the men came back, was displaced from her job and ended up finding a position as a librarian's assistant for a society of some sort, philosopher society, I think it was. And she just works for a real misogynistic, curmudgeonly man who repeatedly tells her, you must not wear makeup because you must not be attractive. And it was just gross having to continually read about that dude. So anyway, she's working at this library and her brother has been killed at war. And in his journals, he talked about a woman and then possibly having silversmith magic. So in this world, there is magic. Is there? Is there though? There's meant to be, but a lot of it is shown. But anyway, he thought he might possibly have magic. And he mentioned the name of someone named India Glass, who is like the mother of magicians in this world. So she decides, I must meet this woman. And with the help of her very Gatsby, Daisy from Gatsby-esque type friend, whose name was Daisy. So she ends up encouraging Sylvia to find this woman, and they sort of masquerade as serving people. And instead of meeting the woman, she meets his son, who's a acclaimed war hero who has survived, I think, 2 wars without a single injury. He's been on the front lines of all the battles, every time on the front line, and he somehow makes it through. He seemed to be quite, the darling of the town because he also saved some people. So anyway, she meets him, ends up getting fired for talking to him at this shindig. He ends up talking to her while he's leaving. And then there is an attempted kidnapping of him. Once again, and this is something that is not explained at all in the book. So we still don't know. There are a lot of little mysteries in this that are just sort of left to fall to the wayside. Do we find out what the whole kidnapping shtick was about? No, we don't. So anyway, she tells him, hey, can you help me out? And they end up sort of like working together. He also consults for Scotland Yard. That's another thing. Anyway, anywho, he ends up getting her fired from her job because he goes to visit her there. So he ends up giving her a job working with their librarian, like this. Men in their cars, man. Seriously. They end up working in his sort of family's library, and she loves that job. She loves it. The whole time she's sort of crushing on him, but then you find out he has a really lovely fiance. And at that point, I'm like, oh no, I can't do this. I can't have that's not my kind of romance. You know what I mean? I'm like, But does she stay away from him? No. So you get pages upon pages and chapters upon chapters of her saying to herself, I really must not see this man ever again. And then the next page, hey, I'm calling him up. We're going to go hang out. So I couldn't with that. It got ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But that was her thing. That's what she decided to do. And there was also, so they got the mystery of finding out why her brother thought they had magic. Is that solved? No. I'm letting you know this because you'll be sorely disappointed. The other main mystery in this book is art theft. People are stealing these magical paintings. Who's behind it? We don't really care. It is the most boring and dull mystery. Who gives a shit? Like I said, there's meant to be all of this type of magic. None of it is really shown in this book. This is so slowly paced. None of the things you actually care about learning are revealed. I'm guessing this is meant to be a series. Am I going to read it? No. Hell no. God, this was dull. This was probably one of the most dullest books I have read. And I've read quite a few dullards. I read it to the end because I thought maybe it'll pick up, maybe it'll get exciting. It did not. There was shitty romance, absolutely shitty, slow pacing. The characters were, okay. The magic system, what magic are you talking about? There is none. So that was a huge bloody letdown. But that's okay, because I've decided that even though none of the other books that are on my most anticipated are in my possession, either because they haven't been published or the library hasn't gotten them yet, and that sometimes takes a long time for my library to get them in. So I couldn't read one of the others that I actually posted on my list. But there was one that I was weighing up whether I should, and that is Nightbirds. Nightbirds, I think, is sort of historical in a way in the time period that it's set. But in this world, magic is outlawed, and yet there are these women called the Nightbirds who are housed by the great houses, and people pay to use their services. So they have different skills. Some can change your appearance, some can enable you to affect the moods of others. And I'm like, well, if everybody knows and everybody's going to pay, then how are they doing this? If it's illegal, that doesn't make sense. So that already doesn't make sense. But anyway, they've decided these women are pretty much just used for their abilities, and then they are married off to be broodmares because the great houses want to continue to have magic that they can sell to everybody else. So the women have decided at this point that they would no longer like to be in the gilded cages and want to have the freedom to choose their own futures. I've just started it, and I've been introduced to all three of the women, and it's okay. It's okay. I'm not in love with it, but I'm not hating it. But we'll see how we feel at the 50-page mark. I'm hoping that I get into it because most of these books were a bit meh, I think. But yeah, well, fingers crossed, but I thought I'd just throw this last one in there. I'm hoping for a winner here, guys. So far my most anticipated reads list, it's not doing very well. It's actually not doing very well. My picker must be off because I am not picking books that I am loving. So I'm going to have to look into that a little bit. But today I am going to my mother's. It's been 40 days since my grandmother passed away, and in the Greek tradition, we sort of gather together after the 40 days are over. So that's what we're doing today. But when I come home, I'll have a bit of a read and I'll update you then. Apologize for the bird sounds, guys, but I live in a place where there are a lot of birds and parrots and they like to chirp. So I read The Nightbirds, and this was set in a sort of 1920s Prohibition era type world where magic is prohibited and the Nightbirds are protected by the great houses. There's also a church, religion, and a monarchy and fanatical cults. So they all sort of come into play. I don't quite understand how the houses are really protecting these girls from these other institutions and organizations. Will they just come and take the girls? That doesn't make sense. But anyway, the girls have romances. Some of them have multiple options of love interests. There is a sapphic romance in this is probably the best out of all the romances. One of the girls is literally juggling two at the same time, and I'm not a fan of that like thing, to be honest. I was like, just pick one. Pick one. I've decided to give it 3 stars. It was okay. There was just something about it that just didn't light my fire. It was very basic. It was a bit slow. I didn't particularly love the writing. I guess out of the characters, maybe Mathilde was my favorite. Didn't love her. They're constantly comparing to the girls working for the great houses as working in a whorehouse. But I'm like, what are you trying to say about that? Can you elaborate what you mean? Are you trying to denigrate whorehouses? Are you trying to put a negative stigma on that? That wasn't really developed. It picks up later on, so it is a bit slow, to be honest. There's a lot of bad men in this book because this magic system is gender-based, so only the women have the power, and the men are very angry about that because they believe it's a sacrilege and it's a perversion of God. Not really, once again, expanded upon that sort of thinking. So yeah, this does continue on, so it's left in a way that a lot of stuff happens right at the end of the book. Naturally, I will not be reading further than this. I have come to the end of my journey with this book. The cover is gorgeous, just wanted to put that out there. Cover, gorge. But this story as a whole didn't do it for me, unfortunately. So those were the books that I've read for the anticipated reads. Most of them, not great, really. The best 2 were, it's probably Ven Co up the top there with 3, but it was better than Nightbirds, which is also a 3. And then you've got The Librarian of Crooked Lane, 2.5, which was, honestly, if I was listening to someone snore all night, that would be more entertaining than The Librarian of Crooked Lane. And then you've got my 2 DNFs, the rom-com agenda, which negatively stigmatizes mental health. Gotta love that. And then the book that actually had me viscerally feeling like, get this book away from me, was The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. Just could not hack that one. It made me feel gross. Like I had a really itchy jumper on that I just wanted to rip off. So yeah, not great. What can you do? What can you do? You know, sometimes a blurb is just not a great indicator of your future enjoyment of the book. They all sounded really promising, but none of them delivered. And yeah, it's the worst part of loving to read is when you just continue to pick up books that you really don't like. It can be very disheartening and it can make you feel like you don't enjoy reading, but I do. I love reading. It's just I don't like reading less than average books. That just feels like I've wasted my precious time. So, but that's the risks of being a reader, you know. It's just a roll of the dice. You could end up with an amazing, life-changing, mood-altering book. You can end up with it was okay, it passed the time, or you can end up with a, good Lord, I wish I could rewind time and not have had that experience. So it is what it is. But because it's taken only a couple of days for me to finish these books, I am going to do another little mini reading vlog for you. But until next time, I hope you have a glorious morning, afternoon, or evening. And as always, stay wild, star child.